Tony Hammock, Persuasive Speech. Now parents, ask yourself, how late is too late? Curfew is a word, well, every teenager hates to hear come out of their parents' mouths, even if it is for their own good. Teenagers staying out late, getting into trouble, and doing things they shouldn't do needs to be improved. And one way it can be improved is by enforcing the teenage curfew law. The teenage curfew law simply states that everyone under 17 and younger has to be home at a certain time. And if they're not home at the desired time, then they are either fined or have to do community service. Late one Friday night, two 15-year-old girls were found in a parked car with a 25-year-old registered sex offender. The two 15-year-old girls had been flirting with disaster and hadn't even been known it. If it wasn't for the curfew sweeps done that night, the teenage girls could have been seriously hurt. The curfew sweeps were intended to help keep the juveniles off the streets late at night and out of trouble. The two 15-year-old girls were not the only ones that were caught after curfew that night. There were amongst 100 other people under the age of 18 caught. Most of them seemed sorry they were caught after 11 p.m., but weren't quite concerned that they had broken the law. The teenage curfew law is a big issue in cities today. Young adults are out until 2 a.m. partying, hanging with friends, drinking, and potentially putting themselves in harm. The teenage curfew law is also intended to keep juvenile crime rates low. Some parents do not agree with the teenage curfew law because they feel as if it is taking away their authority over their children. But parents, it is simply there to help enforce your curfew even more. A few years ago in Connecticut, two city aldermen decided to join America's cities by creating a curfew for all young adults under the age of 18. They hoped this curfew law would help keep young adults off the street late at night and out of trouble. The city aldermen decided to broadcast their ideas to the Board of Young Police Commissioners, the BYAPC. The BYAPC is a group of young adults such as yourselves that are simply there to help get points across to teenagers like you and I. The BYAPC broadcasted the teenage curfew law in front of a school. Now, many of the teenagers at the school did not agree, but that is bound to happen. But after the BYAPC gave them a few examples and showed them how necessary and important it is, they changed their minds. So, teenagers, the curfew law, yes, sometimes it's not the greatest thing because we all want to hang out with our friends late at night. But if you think about it, it is for your own good. The curfew did prove to be effective in Connecticut and lowered the juvenile crime rate nearly 30%. On December 3rd, 2011, I interviewed O'Neill's mayor, Bill Price. I asked Bill many questions. One was, does O'Neill have a curfew? And he replied with yes. O'Neill has a curfew. O'Neill's curfew on the weekdays is 11 o'clock, and on the weekends, 12:30. I then asked Bill if there are any consequences for being out past curfew. He told me yes. That if you're past curfew, you or your parents are fined, or you have to do community service. And the amount you are fined depends on how late you are past curfew. I also asked Bill if there are any special occasions where it is appropriate to be out past curfew. He said there are certain times where a student can be past curfew because they are at a schooling activity or a sports activity. But in order for them to be passed with this, they have to have a note from their principal, a note from their coach or teacher, and a note from their parents. I then proceed to ask Bill many more questions, far too many to include in my speech today, but they were all reasonable answers and really opened my eyes to this. Staying out late, having a time with your friends, is the life when you're a teenager. No one would want to spend their life cooped up at home reading a book. I mean, maybe some people do, but for others, that's just not how it is. Teenagers that stay out late and don't get enough sleep are most likely to become ill and perform poorly in school activities and at school. One study shows that teenagers that get less than 56 hours of sleep a week are most likely to become ill and prone to disease. One study of Rhode Island teenagers found that 85% of teenagers got at least 10 hours of sleep a week less than they should, which was found at Checking Out Why Teenagers Stay Up Late, School Starts Early, copyright 2011. The Washington Post Company. There are several factors when considering a reasonable time for your child to be home. Studies show that teenagers need a minimum of 8 hours of sleep, but would perform better with 8 to 10. In order for your teenager to get that full 8 hours of sleep, there are many factors to consider. If your teenager gets home around 10:30, because that's your desired curfew for them, and it takes them a half an hour to fall asleep, then they would be asleep by 11. And if they woke up at 7 o'clock for school, that would be getting 8 hours of sleep, which is the recommended amount. So, when you think about it, you want to include all the counts of how early and how late your child should be out. Some people would argue that curfew should be abolished because they're hard to maintain and teenagers can hide from the police patrols at night, but that's not always the easiest thing to do. Some studies show that juvenile crime rates have decreased because of the teenage curfew law. In Dallas, Texas, a curfew for youth under the age of 17 took place in May 2000. Police reports show that violent crime rates in juveniles decreased nearly 30.3% because of the teenage curfew law. Because of the teenage curfew law, it was enforced and helped keep teens off the streets late at night. And it also shows that most crimes are committed between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And the curfew in Dallas was that the teenager had to be home by 11 on weekdays and 12 on weekends, which gave him hardly enough time to go commit a crime. Many teenagers do not agree with the curfew law because they are good children and they follow the rules and they listen. Well, that's not always the case, because a quote by Ed Couch Police Chief Eloy Cardenas said, "Sometimes you have to protect yourself from yourself, because even a bored kid can get into lots of trouble." Found in the article Teenage Encouraged to Follow Curfew, written by Lindsay Matchick, Freedom Communications Incorporation. The teenage curfew law does have its ups and downs, but not everything is perfect. With the teenage curfew laws being enforced, you can always be reassured where, when, and what your child is doing.